Hi, I'm Greg Gillismith, and sorry if I'm not what you expected, but I'm out here at the Pier Fire. This is up in Sequoia National Monument, and this is the one that burned in September. So you can start to see behind me, there's some green that's coming back in the little creek. But I thought I'd use this location to talk about debris flow. And one of the comments I made on one of my posts was, think like a mud flow. And I realized that might not be kind of common sense or natural for most people. So I've been thinking for the last few days, how can I describe how to think like a mud flow? And it's funny because I just got a shirt this Christmas, and it says, "This is how I roll," and it has the picture of a circle on an inclined slope, and then it has these equations. And I realized that the same equations that define how something rolls down an inclined plane or down a slope is the same thing that determines what's going on with mud. So let me show you what I'm talking about. All right, so I'm standing in this creek, and you can see it's filled with debris. This is going to be similar to what's happening there above all our communities in Ventura and Santa Barbara counties. And it's filled with all kinds of garbage left over from the fire. Branches and stumps and rocks, and these rocks used to be buried in the mountains, surrounded by bushes and things. And so what's going to decide whether a rock rolls down this mountain? What's going to decide whether this mud pushes down this hill? And what is going to keep it going and what's going to stop it? So for a moment, I want you to just think about something like this, a rock. What causes this rock to move down the mountain? Well, let's see. So you've got the weight of the rock, and it's embedded in the soil. And so then there's this slope. So if that were a perfectly round boulder on a smooth slope, it would start rolling right away, right? So what's the difference? Well, you have some source of friction. Let's just call it friction. This is embedded in the soil, and there's some friction. If you applied enough force up here, eventually it would start moving. This could also be mud. So it could just be part of this soil that's here in the creek bed. Let's just assume that that is like a big ball. What would cause it to start moving? Well, if you decrease the friction, right? If somehow you were able to decrease the attachment of this soil into the hill, then that would cause it to start sliding. And how does that happen? Well, if you get water that goes into this soil, it starts to turn it a little bit into a liquid. That changes its friction. It also does something at the same exact time. As the moisture goes into that hill, it makes it heavier. So if you make it heavier, that's increasing its force, and you decrease its friction by making it muddy, eventually that will slide. So what's the other element that you can do to make that slide faster or easier? It'd be the angle. So if you took the same hill in the same conditions and you just inclined this steeper, eventually then it would slide also. So what does all that mean? The steeper the slope that you have is going to increase the chances that something is going to roll down the hill. The decreased friction, the base at the bottom, and if you get that muddy and soft, then you decrease the friction. Or if you increase the force up here at the top, then that will start it moving. So then what stops it? Well, if this slope decreases and it goes out into the flats, those soccer fields of that school that's there in western Ventura, as it reaches those flats, well, you don't have as much of that angle to keep pushing on this anymore. And maybe the mass is the same, but here's something else that happens. You have momentum, and momentum is a function of the speed and of the weight. So the weight of this also has a little bit, I think, to do with the height. So if this were really, really small, the momentum, the rolling momentum of that would decrease. So here's what I'm thinking. If you can think of that mud flow coming down the hill of Ventura as a whole bunch of golf balls, if the golf balls are focused into a channel, like right in here, if it's in a channel, all those golf balls are going to be filled up, and it's going to be deep. And as it comes down the canyon, that is going to continue to have momentum because the golf balls are filling this whole canyon, and it's very tall. As that comes into the flats, what do those golf balls do? They get thinner and thinner and thinner because they get spread out into the flatland. As that gets thinner, it reduces its momentum, and it loses velocity. And as it loses velocity, the solids will drop out, and it'll leave all this crud in the flatland or on the soccer fields, as you think about it. All right, let's think about those golf balls again. Say you've got a house that's right here, and this canyon is filled with golf balls, and it's coming down, and say you have a wall of sandbags. You don't want to go across the canyon because that would be silly. The golf balls would come down, they would hit the wall and blow it over. So you want to turn those sandbags at a bit of an angle, so you're just diverting them. So golf balls come down the canyon, they hit the diversion guides them around and down this way. All right, so golf balls works if it's more like mud, but if it's one of these guys, and to give you an idea of scale, that rock is about 15 feet in diameter. If that comes down the hill and hits a wall or some sandbags, it's not going to behave like golf balls. It has much more momentum going in a straight line. So if your house is then on the other side of said sandbags or wall, and this is coming at you, it's a whole lot harder to direct that around. All right, I'm going to keep walking down this canyon and see if there's anything other interesting to look at. So one other thing I just discovered as I'm walking down, and it may be hard to pick up on camera, but do you see all these little depressions? Those are footprints. You know, so this forest looks pretty well scorched. There's not a lot of green around here. You can see some up there on the hill. There's a little pocket over there that got missed, but most of this is pretty burned out. But there's obviously quite a bit of animal life back in here. Even some green life coming back, which is cool to see. We've had a little bit of rain since the fires in September. What I'm seeing is there's quite a bit of animal life in here. These look like deer prints, so it's exciting to see that they're taking over back here into the forest. That's something to think about too. As a question came up, is what about all of the animal life that got killed in the fires? And although that's sad and it's part of the process, there is less environment that will support that wildlife right now. If you think about those forests around Ojai and Ventura County, aren't going to be able to support the same number of animals for a little while. So there's a little bit of a balance there, that the animals that are left are going to have that environment that's left. Well, as I'm walking down this canyon, one thing I'm really seeing is, well, one, is I've never seen this canyon before. When it was covered in brush, I couldn't get down in here at all. But look at all of the rock and debris that's down in this canyon. And that it's really fluffy. I can see that it's just easy to move. This soil has had a lot of damage to it in the fire. So for now, it looks like the moisture is soaking in here. But you can see as this gets saturated and increases the weight and decreases the friction, eventually this is going to be able to move down the hill. And below me, down there, probably about a mile, is the main road that comes up into these mountains. So a lot of this mud will probably end up on that road. Well, life is gradually returning here to the forest. It's been a few months, but as I came down into this creek bottom, you might be able to hear it flowing behind me. And the little plants are starting to come back. Most of these trees are gone, and there's the conifers don't like to get hot. They tend to die. But the good news is those oak trees that you see around Ventura and Santa Barbara counties, there's the way that they get to be 300 and 400 years old is that they're able to tolerate fire. And they look all crispy now, and it's probably pretty sad, but a lot of those are going to spring back. And if you drive up by the Whittier fire that happened a little earlier in the fall, up there by Kachuma, you can see that those oak trees are already starting to sprout out. So there's hope, and there's renewal, and there's rebirth that's happening in the forest. It's just going to take a while. Houses don't rebuild themselves, and those are going to take the longest. And then the emotional scars. Those are going to take the longest to recover. And you're going to hear or smell things that are going to remind you of that night. And that's just going to take time and I think some time away and seeing other things and some perspective. So I wish you well. Have a great day. Peace.